Welcome back, guys. You're listening to another episode of the Rebel Talk presented by the Rebel Walk. I'm Cam Wicker, and as always, I'm here with Zach Moreth, and we're back for another episode of just recapping a little bit of Ole Miss sports today. We're going to be recapping National Signing Day, which took place yesterday for across the country and just was a big day for Ole Miss, signing a 22-person class, signed the 22nd guy today, and I believe there's a 23rd guy who just hasn't signed yet in Tyler Lee. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Pretty big class for Lane Kiffin. This year seems like he's been more of a portal guy over these past years, not a really large class
Right.
the past couple of years for this Ole Miss team. Just your overall thoughts about this class right now, Zach, and just what is to come for this class, because really it doesn't seem like Ole Miss is done yet.
No, not at all. And, this is a situation that Lane mentioned yesterday, but I truly do believe this is the best, high school class that he's brought in during his time at Ole Miss. And, whether that's a collection of the staff and having Pete Golding, he threw around Calvin Bolden's name, who he's done an incredible job, especially in the state of Mississippi. There's no question that these evaluations are really solid. And we saw that in a lot of the last recruiting updates, I guess you could call it, when, these websites provide their updates in recruiting and stars and all that good stuff. But especially in guys, such as Shakai Mills-Knight, I believe he was a 4-star, kind of on the lower side of things when he committed to Ole Miss. And then boom, a couple months go by, he finishes his senior season, and he's a borderline 5-star. So really good evaluations, it seems like, for the most part. Kiffin mentioned it in his press conference yesterday as well. A lot of size coming in from this offensive line. I think they got 4 offensive linemen with the flip of Connor Howes today from Arkansas. And I think all of them are above 6'5" and coming in around the range of 300 pounds. And this is that foundation that you've kind of been missing. Especially, if you look at this team, nearly everybody was a transfer portal player, especially in those, big time skill positions. And now you have guys like Caleb Cunningham, Shakai, like I mentioned, Dylan Alfred, Winston Watkins, who signed with Ole Miss. Really, players with a lot of potential who have that ability to get unlocked in Lane Kiffin's offense. So just really exciting stuff, Cam. Interesting situation with Tyler Lockhart. We'll get into that later. But it's promising, and I really enjoyed what I heard from, what Lane said yesterday, and, I'm excited to see the impact that these guys can make, similar to, the freshmen we've seen in the past, one of them being Quinshon Judkins just a couple years ago.
Absolutely. And like Zach said, we'll get into the Tyler Lockhart situation a little bit. I want to touch a little bit on that offensive line Zach talked about. Just in past years, especially since Lane Kiffin has taken over for Ole Miss doesn't recruit heavy or on that offensive line. Over the years, it seems like you maybe get 2 to 3 guys a year. They've already got 4 now, and it seems like they're not done yet. Like I said earlier, they'll probably go after a couple more in the portal. Big on the portal last year in the offensive line, and you're losing a lot of those guys this year, and no telling who jumps in the portal out of those guys. You don't really have a lot to develop at that offensive line spot either. You got Bryson Sanders, Preston Cushman, John Wayne Oliver, Cammys. You got a couple of guys that you're hoping will stay put here in Oxford, but you really want to just build, like Zach said, just bringing in a lot of these big offensive linemen like they did this year. I believe a couple of these guys this year, like Zach said, pretty big guys, but Kenneth Boston stood out the most to me.
Yeah.
6'7", 330, comes from a small school in Louisiana, River Oaks. I played against those boys back in high school. It's a really small school. Don't have a lot of guys really come out of there, but a guy that big just shows some promise. And it seems like when you get him out here in the SEC play, and that's where he belongs, 6'7", 330, as a Xavier Harris type guy. And if Ole Miss can keep bringing in those type of guys of those type of size that can compete up front every year with guys with teams like Georgia, teams like Alabama, teams like that, because you can win up front, you can win any game at any point of the season. I wanted to touch a little bit on the defense too. Notice there was 13 of the 22 signees that were on the defense side of the ball. So this is pretty much courtesy of Pete Golden right here. I know there's been speculation of Pete Golden maybe accepting other jobs this offseason or maybe moving somewhere else. But obviously, I wouldn't jump the boat too quick on that. We've heard in the past that he's pretty happy here. He's expressed that pretty well. And I've told you this, Zach, off camera, but it seems like if Pete Golden wanted to be a head coach somewhere else, he would have accepted a head coaching job out of Alabama and not come to Ole Miss to be a defensive coordinator. Pretty much the same position he had, same control of the defense he had over at Alabama. He has that here at Ole Miss. So it doesn't seem like he's too interested in being a head coach right now. And it seems like he's building something here at Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin right now. Pretty big names on this defensive signing class. Mason Dunn, top 200 player, pretty good player in the state of Mississippi this year. He'll be a DB for the Rebels. He won't be here till the fall though. Andrew Maddox will be enrolling in the spring. It's a big name. You got AJ Maddox on the team right now. Was big in landing. His brother Andrew Maddox, defensive lineman out of Oak Grove, Mississippi. And then you have Bryson Walters from yesterday. It seems like really we don't really know too much about him right now. I think he had a late season injury, and you're not going to really know what that's going to look like for him. I think I don't know if he will be coming in the spring. It doesn't look like he will be, but that's another position of need for Ole Miss, and we're going to have to see what they do with that in the future. It doesn't seem like the middle linebacker position is pretty stout right now for Ole Miss, but a lot of good defenders in this class, 6 DBs. It seems like that's where Pete Golden kind of kept all his interest at.
Yeah, and it's something that he kind of had to. If you look at the secondary this year, this isn't a shot by any means, but they were the weakest part of that defense. And, it speaks to how elite the defensive front was, including those linebackers. But, I think everyone can admit that watching those games, you even look at that Mississippi State game, it was kind of frustrating when, Van Buren's slinging it down the field. And we haven't really seen that out of State's offense all year. But, they were able to make those deep ball passes against our defense, which seemed to be, kind of the Achilles heel of the defense for the entire year. Guys like Mason Dunn, this is a player who Alabama was after heavily, really trying to get him to flip before signing day. And credit to Pete Golding, we're going to say it all year long, but really just a nice job to beat out Alabama, land a Tupelo guy. The kid's 6'3", 180 pounds, and he's going to be a true freshman. The frame is there, and this is exactly the type of player that Golding likes to work with, whether it be at safety, corner, or both. This is a really impressive kid who I'm really excited to see. Tylen Lee, I believe he'll be signing Friday, Cam. Don't really know what's going on here. Florida State's making a late push. I haven't heard too much other than that, and it's probably going to be what we like to call a game time decision here. You're not going to know too much until pen hits the paper, but a really talented player and one that I would love to see develop with Pete Golding. But there's no question that the Seminoles are making a big push there. You've talked about it a little bit, but Ladarian Clardy, he got offered from LSU a little bit after he committed to Ole Miss, and he flat out said it. That's his dream school. So I'm gonna say it one more time for those who don't hear. Pete Golding is holding kids off from their quote dream schools in the SEC, and this is a Florida kid. It's a shorter trip to Baton Rouge than it is to Oxford, Mississippi. And Ladarian Clardy is one hell of a player. Lane Kiffin personally recruited him. If you go look at Clardy's Instagram or Twitter, Kiffin's seemingly all over the place, which is good. You like to see that connection and relationship between coaches and players. This is 6-foot safety. He reminds me of TJ Banks out of last year's class, a guy who could see the field as a freshman, might not a whole lot, but definitely, on pace for a big-time sophomore year with Ole Miss. Other than that, Cam, depth, a lot of depth, just never a bad thing. Kiffin said it yesterday. This is a time in college football where, the transfer portal can make you good, can put you on pace for a run. We're seeing it with Indiana and Ole Miss this year. But in the long run, you have to be able to connect with these high school recruits because it's a lot easier to maintain a high school recruit than it is to go try and poach one off another team's roster. So ultimately proud of what Lane Kiffin and the staff have done here. This is a top 15 class in the country, and the transfer portal hasn't even opened. So when you pair the portal with the high school recruiting, you're looking at probably another top 5 class, which is something that Kiffin has seemingly nailed every year here at Ole Miss in the transfer portal. So really exciting things. It's going to be awesome. The last guy I want to touch on is Caleb Cunningham, 6'3", 180 pounds. If you haven't, I strongly recommend you go watch this guy dunk the basketball. I think On3 posted a Twitter clip, but Caleb Cunningham is a freak athlete, Cam. And you're losing a lot of those. You're losing Trey Harris, who, in my opinion, is a guy with the athleticism of Caleb Cunningham. So if Cunningham can come in here, it's tongue twister there, put on 5 to 10 pounds of muscle and ultimately develop his game with George McDonald and Austin Simmons and in Lane Kiffin's offense, I really don't see a reason why he can't play from the second the ball snaps next fall. So really excited for Caleb Cunningham to potentially earn a starting role looking at next year's offense. But yeah, wrapping up, on the class here before we get into this Lockhart situation. Good job of the staff. foundation has been built. Got to continue to keep this momentum into next year, and then into next year's class, and hope to God that you're able to maintain these guys throughout their college careers. But really good job from Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss.
Absolutely. Like Zach says, 15th ranked class in the country. Only going to keep building with the portal and maybe even adding a couple high school guys before the next signing day comes around. Another guy I wanted to move into before we move on to Tyler Lockhart real quick is Winston Watkins, late pickup from Ole Miss. Pretty big time pickup. He's going to be a speedster. It seems like Austin Simmons is going to be one of those type of guys who sits in the pocket and throws to those speedster guys like Caden Lee. And Winston Watkins is very similar to Caden Lee. So we're going to see him in this team. He's going to be a spring and rollie too, which is big time for Ole Miss. Two guys that aren't going to be spring and rollies that I think is kind of unfortunate is Caleb Cunningham as of right now and Shakai Mills Knight. Kind of unfortunate there. Shakai Mills Knight, 6'3", 225-pound back. He's a huge guy. Ole Miss could really need him on the field next year to play right away. So it would be good to have him in the spring, but it doesn't look like he will be arriving in the spring. And also Devin Harper, interior offensive lineman that Ole Miss stole from LSU a couple weeks ago, will also be arriving in the spring at Ole Miss. Ole Miss got the number one player in the state of Mississippi 3 years in a row, and like Zach said, they're going to keep building. Kiffin talked about it yesterday. This is a team that wants to build off recruiting high school prospects, not off the portal every year. That's really where you become a powerhouse like Georgia, like Alabama, like Michigan, Ohio State. They recruit in state. They recruit big-time prospects from out of state and bring them in. And that leads me into my next topic where Ole Miss landed the number one linebacker in the state. Got him to flip from Mississippi State yesterday. Tyler Lockhart, probably earlier in the daytime yesterday, I would say in the afternoon, made his flip from Mississippi State to Ole Miss. And seemingly, it seemed like he was going to sign there. It seemed like it was going to be pen to paper there, and Ole Miss had him locked in. Around 9 p.m. last night, Mississippi State posted a graphic to their X account saying that Tyler Lockhart had signed to be a Mississippi State Bulldog. It's a very weird situation. It's very hard to understand what's actually happening if you're not really reading into it. Obviously, there's a lot of hearsay. It's a lot of he said, she said that, and we're not really going to know anything for certain until Tyler Lockhart or someone in his family or someone that really knows him really well is open and truthful about this situation to someone in the media about it. So we're really not going to know exactly. This means Zach are spitballing here, and we're going to just rant a little bit about what we think about this situation. But it seems like this is situations we've seen in the past where kids can't go places because of their parents not wanting them to go a certain place. We've seen on national television, I believe, a couple of years back where a kid committed to Florida and his mother, I believe, had either a Tennessee or a Bama shirt on, and she didn't like that very well. We've seen this type of stuff in the past. If you've seen the pictures yesterday of Tyler Lockett committing, his parents didn't look very happy. His brother, who is a member of the Mississippi State football team, didn't look very happy. And I believe also his best friend is a member of the Mississippi State football team. So it didn't seem like a lot of people were happy with the decision that Tyler Lockhart made yesterday. And it turned out Ole Miss reached out to his mother and his parents about signing a document, which is a financial aid agreement now, no longer a national letter of intent. They got rid of that this year with all the money that athletes are bringing in and the binds that it comes to putting an athlete to a school with the transfer portal area. It's a lot that goes into that now, but it's just the financial aid agreement now, and they need a signature from the parent. Apparently, Tyler Lockhart's mother did not sign this. She signed the one from state. State posted this at 9 p.m. and said that Tyler Lockhart is officially signed with the Mississippi State Bulldogs. It's a weird situation, Zach. I really don't know what to think about it.
No, I saw the tweet, and my first reaction was I couldn't tell if it was like a burner account. SEC burner accounts they're very good at their job, I'll put it that way. But I was just kind of thrown off guard, and then you look more into the situation. And I want to take, the fans back. If you haven't, go watch the video of Tyler Lockhart announcing his signing to Ole Miss. He's throwing up the shark fin, wearing Ole Miss gear. He looks excited. And if you look, to his left and right, his father, his mother, his brother, whoever his friends may be in Mississippi State gear, they look relatively pissed off and not too thrilled that he's going to play for their in-state rival. So clearly something happened, and it's unfortunate because we saw this. I don't like throwing players under the bus here, but there were some problems with Quinshon Judkins and his mother that separated all ties between Ole Miss and Quinshon. And then you look here, and now you have a guy who clearly wanted to come to Ole Miss, went against the belief of his brother and his parents and all his friends and family for an opportunity to go play for Pete Golding in an elite defense, which we have seen on the field this year. And his mother gets in the way and says, sorry, I'm not going to sign one paper. I'm going to sign the one that says Mississippi State so you can be on the field with your brother and we can all travel to Starkville and have a great day. That seems to me like what happened. And it's kind of a shame that the opportunity is being taken away in a really immoral state, I would say, Cam. It's something that, is frustrating as a former athlete, because if my mother was taking away my dream school, I'd probably be pretty frustrated. I can't lie, but there's also some weird things going on with Mississippi State. They lost a lot of recruits yesterday, so God knows what under the table stuff they went and pulled for Tyler Lockhart to eventually turn to Mississippi State, whether that was offering more money, trying to get his brother in the mix of offering the brother more money, or telling TJ Lockhart to try and convince Tyler more. I firmly believe something happened throughout the day, and I don't really understand why. I wanted to bring up this point. Mississippi State's best recruit last year, J.J. Harrell, who was between Ole Miss and Mississippi State, is now in the transfer portal after 1 year in Starkville. Braylon Burnside caught for -6 yards. That was their second best recruit last year. Their best defense recruit, Tyler Woodard, as a safety, he made 9 tackles in 3 games where he recorded stats. So not much of an opportunity going on in Mississippi State. And granted, you take into account that those were the stats these players posted on probably the worst SEC team. So if you're going to tell me with a straight face Tyler Lockhart wants to go probably not play his freshman year for a team that he should be playing on, and then ultimately be one of the worst teams in the SEC, I think you're crazy. And a guy of his talent and his potential wants to go play for Pete Golding, who's coached all these incredible, Toa from Alabama, Will Anderson, Pooh Paul this year, TJ Daugherty. These are proven guys who are going to make noise in the NFL. And if you think Tyler Lockhart is choosing Mississippi State over Ole Miss, I think you're way off, and simply you're false. So that's kind of where I'm at with this, Cam. But whether it's a transfer portal or something else, I think Lockhart is going to find a way to get to Ole Miss, because kid's going to do what he wants. And in the age of NIL and the transfer portal and all this undercover, under the table things, these type of situations usually work themselves out. But definitely some very sleazy work from whoever it was on that side of the coin, State, the mother, the father. I don't know. Not a fan of it, Cam.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. It seems like it's a lot of that situation. Obviously, no one's really going to know for sure who's behind any of it until someone like Lockhart, like I said earlier, or a family member opens up about what actually happened behind the scenes. But like Zach said, it seemed like State has some things going on behind the scenes. I know this is an Ole Miss driven account, and we're rivals with Mississippi State, but it seems like the programs are going in a different direction. And even Lane Kiffin said it at his press conference. And usually Lane Kiffin doesn't take open shots like that. Most of his shots are subtle. But he said it in his press conference the other day. There's these programs going in 2 different directions right now. Like Zach said, mentioning some of the guys in the transfer portal, I think State has it like 8 or 9 guys in the transfer portal right now. And I believe 2 of them were listed as starters last year. So it's probably going to get pretty ugly for this State team in the portal this year. And we'll have to see what they can do leading to the next years after a pretty rough year under Jeff Lebby this first time around. But like Zach said, it's just a situation that you don't really like to see, but it's a situation that's going to work itself out with the age of the transfer portal. If Lockhart really wanted to be at Mississippi State, he'll be there for the next 4 years and not move anywhere. But if this was a decision that he really didn't want to make, obviously Lockhart will probably be in the portal sometime soon, if not next year. Don't really know for sure what the situation is as of right now. But it seems like Lockhart is pretty much signed and ready to go to Mississippi State for the next year. So moving on into a little bit of other stuff for Ole Miss sports right now, we don't really have a lot to talk about for college football playoffs. The other day, Ole Miss was ranked 13th, just outside of the rankings right there. Alabama in there in 11. Miami was in there in the first 4 out with Ole Miss in the 12th spot. And I believe I've seen a lot. We talked about this, Zach. We see a lot on Twitter, on X, about just players of Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, trying to, I guess, plead their case. And most of these shots they've been taking have been at Alabama. And I understand Alabama has some pretty ugly losses, but so does Ole Miss. Ole Miss has 3 losses that don't look very good either, and one of Alabama's losses is against a Georgia team. We talked about this off camera before, Zach. It's a Miami team that's in front of Ole Miss right now, and they're completely jumping over that fact. I believe I seen a quote. We talked about this as well. Cam Ward said that they've been playing tougher defenses over there in the SEC, apparently. So he doesn't think the College Football Playoff Committee is watching football, which at some points it does seem like that. But that quote from Cam Ward in that situation was a little outlandish. If you watch ACC ball and SEC ball, you understand the difference. You understand what the defenses look like. Miami lost to Georgia Tech and Syracuse, and if you had to ask me, Kentucky and Florida could probably line up against both those teams today and beat them, if not take them to the wire. So, I mean, those are teams that Miami should have beat. And, yes, Ole Miss should have beat Florida. Ole Miss should have beat LSU. Ole Miss should have beat Kentucky. But there's no doubt in my mind that Ole Miss is a better team than Miami. Whether Ole Miss is a better team than Alabama, I'm not sure. They didn't line up against them this year. We don't really know what that game would look like. It really depends on where that game would have took place at times, too. Tuscaloosa is a very hard place to play. If Ole Miss would have had to play there this year, no telling what would have happened. We've seen Ole Miss not do well in those environments in Florida, in Gainesville, and then against LSU and Baton Rouge. So no telling what would have happened if Ole Miss played Bama. It's going to be one of those years where it seems like every other year you have a team that's sitting on the outside looking in the playoffs, and you're thinking, why didn't that team get in? And it seems like it's going to be one of those years with Ole Miss. But this is just a thing that Ole Miss team is going to have to jump over. Lane Kiffin's going to have to move on. You're moving into a new era with Austin Simmons next year, and there's really nothing you can do about the situation moving forward.
No, and this happened to me, Cam. I mentioned it to you before, but the week where you lost to Florida and Alabama got embarrassed in Oklahoma, that was the week that was going to decide everything because we had a pretty good feeling that Bama was probably going to beat Auburn and Ole Miss was probably going to beat Mississippi State. And the second Alabama was ranked ahead of Ole Miss, it seemed that the committee had made their decision right then and there. So in my mind, it's unfortunate, but it seems like Ole Miss has been out of the picture for a couple of weeks now. I am thrilled that they're ahead of South Carolina. Really hostile group of South Carolina fans on Twitter. Maybe that's the word, but yeah, they were very delusional. I'm trying to, take into account that, that's their team and they're going to live and die by their team. But South Carolina lost head-to-head games to Alabama and Ole Miss.
Lost 24 points to Ole Miss at home.
And they're sitting on Twitter complaining about how they should be the last team in over Ole Miss and Alabama. And the best part about all this, Ole Miss fans complaining that they should be in over Alabama and South Carolina. Miami is actually in front of Ole Miss and South Carolina, and Cam kind of just hit on it. But you see Jackson Dart post Ole Miss versus Alabama. We're pretending as if that's not the case, and unfortunately, yeah, Miami's ahead of Ole Miss. I don't agree with it. I think Miami's extremely overrated. I think the ACC is not a good conference, but that's what's happening, and it's really it's unfortunate. This was the season where a lot of Ole Miss fans put all their chips in the bag and wanted to get that cash out, and it didn't happen. You lost to Kentucky, you lost to Florida, and here we are. We're sitting, probably going to go to a bowl game in Florida or Las Vegas, wherever it may be. But it's time to turn the page, and I don't enjoy saying this because I really would have liked to see Ole Miss playing in a couple weeks here in the college football playoffs, but it's transfer portal season, and that's where I'm trying to put my mind, Cam. As unfortunate as it is, there's really no movement for Ole Miss to make in the college football playoffs, and the director of the committee specifically said that, especially with Alabama and Miami in front of you. So it's a tough pill to swallow, but I think it's time, Ole Miss fans take their focus away from the college football playoffs and into the transfer portal and some of the exciting things that Ole Miss has for the future, even going back to yesterday for National Signing Day. So it sucks, it doesn't feel great, but it's time to move on, flip the page, and worry about next year's season because it seems like the ship has sailed from this one. Fun to watch, fun team, no doubt, but there's a lot in store for this program, and that's what you have to realize at the end of the day. So, we'll keep you guys posted with all that sort of content, but Yeah, doesn't look like much movement's going to be happening for Ole Miss moving forward here, Cam.
Absolutely not. And it seems like Lane Kiffin is kind of accepted that to a point now. He's kind of calmed down on social media about the fact a little bit there, not ranting as much as he has been.
Yeah,
But Lane Kiffin said it. You said it, Zach. This program's on the way up. It's time to move forward into next year and worry about um, moving into the Austin Simmons there. This is the time where you have a really good backup quarterback who sat for a year and a half since he's been here at the program. He's also a baseball player, so it's going to get a little weird here down the road. But at some point, Austin Simmons is going to have to make a decision whether he wants to be the quarterback for Ole Miss or a pitcher for Mike Bianco and the Ole Miss baseball team. So we'll have to see how that situation folds out. Obviously, Simmons will probably be in an Ole Miss baseball uniform this spring, but we'll have to see what happens when spring ball rolls around for football.
yeah.
And I'm assuming Austin Simmons will be there at practice for that Ole Miss football team then to be their quarterback. So that's really all we got for football. Like Zach said, we'll have to wait and see what bowl game this team is in and really just see what players decide to not opt out of this bowl game. Ole Miss is going to have a pretty good amount of NFL draft picks this year and wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these guys just opt out to play this game and move forward with their NFL careers. But moving forward into some other Ole Miss sports, men's and women's hoop as of recently have really been on fire lately. Men's hoops really just kind of turning it on as of late. We've seen women's hoop this whole year kind of doing their thing. Only 2 losses right now to USC and UConn. For women's hoops, their last loss was against UConn in the Bahamas. They beat Boston College, advanced to the championship game in that Bahamas tournament. Lost to UConn 73-60. Seemed like a game that Ole Miss just couldn't really shoot it well at the end of the game there. And then Paige Buckers was on fire. I think she finished with 29 in that game. So really just a little too much firepower from UConn there. But it like I said early in the year when talking about Ole Miss losing to USC, it seems like Coach Yo can have these Ole Miss teams hanging with the big time program. It's going to be very interested to see how Ole Miss plays some of these big name programs at home in the pavilion this year and see how that turns out and how the fans turn out for that. I believe they have Texas at home this year, who's ranked third in the country right now, and South Carolina. They'll have them at home later in the year too. And we know that really Ole Miss hasn't been able to hang with South Carolina or get over that hump of South Carolina as of recently in the Coach Yo era. So we'll have to see how that plays out for this women's basketball team this year. They had a big win in their last game against Alabama State, 89-24. This team just keeps being really dominant on defense. I believe Alabama State had like 4 points in the first quarter. It was something crazy like that. Sierra Tano, I keep talking about her every time I get on the podcast here. She's one of the best freshmen in the country, guys, and I don't say that lightly. She scored 16 points, 6 boards, 5 assists, and 4 steals off the bench against Alabama State. I think she played 19 minutes and did all that. So this is someone who's really productive for Ole Miss right now. She didn't have a great game against UConn in that tough matchup there, which is that's understandable. She's a freshman. She doesn't get a ton of minutes as a freshman or is looked upon as someone they're going to rely on to make those big shots in those big games. And then another thing, adding to that, KK Deans, that's who makes the difference for this Ole Miss team right now. That's who seems to be the difference for Coach Yo right now. It seems like KK Deans is exactly what Coach Yo needed. It seems like at times you can't really tell the difference between KK Deans and Coach Yo when they're standing beside each other on the floor. They have the same type of just, I guess, energy about them and same type of, I guess, mentality. I have heard that KK Dean spent a lot of time in the film room with Coach Yo this offseason, just learning from Coach Yo personally. And it seems like that's what we're seeing on the floor this year. KK Dean's being a true point guard out there, and Kennedy Ty Williams helping her out do that as well.
Yeah, and I think the final step for this Ole Miss women's team is to get over the hump of winning that big game. They've proven all year long. I mean, absolutely blowing out these opponents: Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Delaware State, Jackson State, Alabama State, Boston College. You're talking 30-point plus wins here. And, UConn and USC, obviously, is a different story. But those are 2 of the premier programs in the country. So, freshman, she's playing great. I understand it. But you got to take these experiences, really learn from them, and fix your mistakes heading into that next marquee matchup, which we're not going to see here for a little bit. But it's a time to get the confidence back rolling. I thought they did a really nice job responding coming off that UConn loss against Alabama State. Allowing 24 points in a college basketball game is insanity. So, credit to Coach Yo and the coaching staff for, just continue to model this defense exactly how they want. But, yeah, Cam, sky's the limit here. But you got to get over that hump, especially towards the end of the season if you want to make a run in March Madness. But definitely, good stuff and a lot of promise here for the Ole Miss women's team.
Absolutely. This team plays tonight. That's their next game. They're here in about 30 minutes. When this podcast comes out, that game will probably be either concluded or going on. NC State is the game that they're playing. It's the ACC SEC Challenge. That game is in Raleigh, and Ole Miss is actually a 2.5 point underdog in that game. When I checked earlier, NC State was ranked to start the year. They're not anymore. So I do believe this Ole Miss team should go in there and take care of business, even being the underdog in this game. They proved that they can beat big opponents. Oh, they proved that they can hang with the big opponents. And NC State's really not as big as opponent as the teams that you hung with. So this is a game that they should go in there and win. And I fully expect Coach Yo and Team 50 to do that tonight. Moving into men's basketball, ranked 23rd in the country right now. They did lose for their first game in San Diego after they beat BYU in overtime. Juju Murray had 28 points in that game. He seems to be a different level of scorer than he was last year. I know he did this earlier in the year last year where he was scoring against, I wouldn't say lesser opponents, but the smaller opponents and the smaller schools. Juju was going off a little bit earlier in the year last year. But Ole Miss is, I believe, moving up to the top 25 or at least the top 30 in the net rankings right now. So they're playing a lot better competition than they did last year in non-conference play. Lost that game by 2 points to Purdue in that championship game for the tournament in San Diego, and really had a chance to win that game and kind of pull away with it at one point, but couldn't pull it out there at the end. Had a lot of putback late in that game. For Purdue to take the win. Purdue moved up in the rankings because of that, though, and Ole Miss did not move at all. So that's a good sign that the country's kind of, well, I guess the voters in the AP is kind of in believing in this Ole Miss team, believing in what Coach Beard is doing and doing with this team. It seems like he's got a good rotation of about 11 guys on the floor at times. Wardo Klafke, I know we talked about him coming along, but to me, it seems like he's been ready from the start. It seems like Beard had full faith in Klafke and has been full go with him. We've seen him a lot more than John Ball, who seems to be finding his way onto the floor at times as well, just not as much as Klafke, obviously. But this is an Ole Miss team that I think is on fire right now at the right time. Your next big game is against Memphis, who's ranked. They have Musa Cisse. It seems like if Beard had Musa Cisse last year, he would know how to stop him in that game as well. So I would expect Ole Miss to be ready and fired up for that game. Malik Dia seems to be a difference maker for Ole Miss right now. I would like to see more consistency from him from a scoring perspective on a nightly basis. It doesn't seem like he lights up that scoring spot a lot, which sometimes he doesn't have to. Which brings me to my next spot. Dre Davis, even after a little bit of a questionable injury in that Colorado State game, he comes back and he scores 20 the other night in a blowout win over Louisville. In Louisville's place, by the way, 86-63. And it seemed like Ole Miss was really dominant in that game at times. Sean Podula had a great first half. It seemed like this Ole Miss team is playing the best defense that they could be playing right now. The only thing that you really want to improve is that defensive rebounding and boxing out at times. But, again, a lot better than we saw last year from this Ole Miss team.
The progress has been incredible, Cam. And, I guess I'm a little more surprised than a lot of people who know Chris Beard because we haven't seen this type of brand of Ole Miss basketball in the pavilion in quite some years. But if you look at Chris Beard, these are the transitions that he takes with his team, whether it be Texas Tech, Texas. He's an elite coach. He's going to bring in the best of the best players, and he's going to fit them perfectly in his system. And that is to play physical defense, really good defense, and allow your defense to open up opportunities for your offense. And the sheer volume of tip passes, of steals, of physicality that this defense brings to Ole Miss basketball is a game changer. And it might not be a lot right now. You're blowing out some teams like Louisville. But when you get to the SEC, that's how you make or break games. I want to go back to the Purdue loss. Purdue won the game over Ole Miss. But Jamin Brakefield was the leading scorer against Purdue. Against Louisville, Jamin Brakefield scores 1 point, and I believe 5 Ole Miss players scored in double digits. So it reminds me a little bit of the team from last year, but just a much better version of it. And I'm not going to call any of the players out from last year, but the guys brought in like Dre Davis, Brown Jones, Malik Dia. These are dudes who they're just bucket getters, and we're seeing a direct result from their ability to score. And a quick shout out to Dre Davis. He had a slower start to the year, but he showed Ole Miss fans exactly who he can be.
Returning home too. Home to Louisville.
Yeah, man. Comes home and puts on a spectacular performance. And then Juju Murray just continues to shine in this role that we talked about. Juju's not a point guard. And last year he was forced into this role. He had a lot of pressure on him, and now he's allowed to move in space to be a shooting guard. He can still play point guard at times, but with Sean Podula facilitating the offense, Juju's getting these wide open looks that he didn't have last year. So I'm excited, Cam. Football season was a letdown, but we don't really know where this basketball season is going to take us. And I think that's the right mindset to have as a fan. I fully expect this team to get into March Madness. And then when it's March, you never know. So it's going to be fun, paying attention to them. Like you said, got a couple sleeper games here coming up, but that Memphis game is going to be real interesting. I know I will not be there. It's Christmas break for a lot of the students, but I will for sure be tuning in on TV. That's another quad one win opportunity for Ole Miss to boost this resume and prove to the country that, hey, they're ready for the challenge and they can truly take on anyone.
Absolutely. It seems like Ole Miss, when I look at the bracketology right now, it seems like this Ole Miss team sitting around that 8 or 9 seed when you're ranking them right now. If they can make a run in SEC play and obviously beat Memphis when that game comes up here soon, I could see this Ole Miss team finishing the year somewhere between the 6 and 9 seed and getting a good spot in this
Yes.
tournament to make a run at some point. We've seen a lot of interesting thing happen in this tournament. We've seen what Chris Beard can do when he puts a team in this tournament. So really exciting to see what this Ole Miss basketball team is going to do. Touching back, wanted to talk about Mikel Brown-Jones, just an exciting player for Ole Miss to pick up. I know he kind of gets brushed over a little bit, but every time I watch him get on the floor, it seems like he brings an energy. He brings a different type of physicality. He's a different type of player. He looks a lot bigger than 6'9" out there at times.
Yeah.
And it kind of just makes his presence felt. And when he can stay on the floor and stay out of foul trouble, he can score the basketball really well. He can stretch the floor and shoot a little bit from the mid-range, just a little bit. But it seems like this Ole Miss team, like Zach said, Brakefield didn't score a lot of points the other night after being the leading scorer in the loss against Purdue. But this is an Ole Miss team that anybody on the floor can heat up at any point. Sean Padula, Matthew Morrell, Juju Murray, whoever it is. But this Ole Miss team is heading in the right direction right now. We'll have to see what they do heading into SEC play after the Christmas break. Their next game is in the Pavilion at 7 p.m. this Saturday against Lindenwood. I believe Lindenwood just became a D1 program not too long ago. So this is a game that Ole Miss should handle business in pretty well and lead into the Christmas break and next big game against Memphis. I think that's all we got for basketball for you guys, and I think that's all we got for the day's podcast for you guys as well. Next time we see you guys will probably be sometime next week after all these basketball games take place, and maybe talk a little bit about the final rankings and the bowl projection or the bowl spot for Ole Miss if we get that next time we're on the podcast. I believe that's all we got for you guys today, though. Make sure to tune in to the rebelwalk.com for all your Ole Miss sports.